Hi, this is Casey Seiler. I'm editor of the Albany Times-Union. Thanks very much for joining us. We'll be joined in just a second by Albany Mayor Kathy Sheehan. We really appreciate her coming on fairly short notice. I would like to make one programming note, which is that tomorrow at 9 a.m. on all of these platforms, we will be having the fourth and final of the Times-Union Hugh Johnson Advisors Back to Business discussions, which have been devoted to ways in which businesses can get through and thrive after the coronavirus crisis recedes, which of course is something that we all hope. Tomorrow's discussion comes with an excellent panel and will be devoted to the ways in which businesses can and in fact must in most cases reinvent themselves to match the challenges of the crisis and what comes after it. So please join us. Once again, that's 9 a.m. on Tuesday morning. And with that, I will welcome in our special guest, Mayor Kathy Sheehan of the City of Albany. Mayor, are you all clicked in? You're unmuted and whatnot?
I believe so. You can hear me and see me?
Yes, indeed. Thanks so much. And I would like to point out that, as I mentioned before we started, this is the first time in 2.5 months that I've worn a tie, and definitely the first time that I've ever worn a tie in the attic of my house. So,
well, I appreciate it, Casey. Unnecessary, but appreciated.
And yeah, it's nice to dress up every once in a while. So I wanted to get to kind of, it was a fairly big news weekend. Of course, the biggest news, and one that I'm sure you're very happy to hear, is that the Cuomo administration said that the capital region, of course, including Albany, as well as almost a dozen other counties in the greater region, can begin the process of reopening, that after a slight tweak to the metrics and, of course, a promise that the region is going to be able to meet the number of contact tracers that it needs to get to, that the region will be able to begin that process. I want to talk about what that means for you, especially because you, I know, are part of the essentially kind of regional command in what's referred to as kind of the control room for this process.
Yes, and it really is welcome news because it's something that has been much anticipated. And I know that the county executives and supervisors had been working really hard to ensure that the data that was being used was accurate. You know, it's complicated. We're an 8-county region and we have hospitals that serve a much broader region. And so really just making sure that we were dotting I's, crossing T's, and getting accurate information was a fairly heavy lift, heavier than we had anticipated. But I think we're in really good shape now. We had a call yesterday around the contact tracers. I've submitted a list of 77 employees from the city of Albany who are going to be trained. We need to have people ready if they're needed. And so it was really great to see that type of response. All the counties agreed to designate employees to get trained up to be contact tracers and to do the work if necessary.
What kind of are some of the skills involved, sort of in a capsule way, of being a contact tracer? I would imagine there are elements of being a detective and being a census taker, in the sense that you've got to be able to interact with people and get information accurately and very quickly.
Yeah, you know, the thing about it, though, is that it's pretty well scripted. This is something that our county, Albany County, does on a regular basis. They do contact tracing for infectious disease all the time. And so they, when we first got our first COVID-19 positives, they really took that organization and stood it up. They brought in volunteers as well as employees from other departments and trained them up really quickly. So, you know, it requires you to be able to have a conversation with somebody, go through a script, gather information, and then make sure that that information gets into a database. And so I think it's a skill that a lot of people have. A lot of us are craving talking to other people right now. And so, you know, it is an opportunity for people in the region. And I would encourage, you know, that contact tracers aren't limited just to our city and county workforces. There's information that's available on the county website if people out there are looking for work and want to become a contact tracer.
I'd just like to remind people who are watching, we might have a couple of minutes for questions, 5 questions at the end of this. So if you do have them, please post them on whatever platform you're looking at. So Mayor, that's the good news. Of course, the reopening is genuinely positive, but of course we want to talk about the very, very serious fiscal hole that the city of Albany, as well as the greater region, as well as in fact so many regions across our state are going to be facing in the months to come. You've been talking about this over the course of the month, and in fact in the many past weeks. The numbers are of course daunting for the city. It's facing a tax revenue drop estimated at perhaps as high as 20%, a state aid cut that could be 20% as well, and a drop in departmental income of 39%. What is that going to mean for the city over the course of the summer, and indeed all through the year, and perhaps into next year as well?
Well, I think that the real challenge, in addition to the impact that it is going to have on our families, on our workforce, on city services, is that at the very time that we need city governments with all hands on deck to get the economy reopened, we're looking at these cuts. And it makes absolutely no sense. The federal government has provided direct aid to people, to cruise lines, to the airline industry, to businesses, all of which is needed. I'm not suggesting that that wasn't necessary, but our state and local governments are what we need to have on hand, and everybody working to get the economy reopened. You know, we should not be looking at tax increases at this point in time when people have had so much pain and suffering. And we need to make sure that we have the resources on hand to help our businesses reopen. We're looking at really cool ideas. Some of them you talked about in the perspective section I saw today, about, you know, how do we rethink our streets so that we can create those broader sidewalk cafes, outdoor opportunities? How do we look at what we're going to do with our young people this summer to be able to continue to have some activities for them? It's going to be more expensive. It's going to require that we do things that keep our children safe. We're probably going to need more adult supervision, but we should be innovating, not cutting. And that's why it's so frustrating that we are in this situation that we're in right now.
But clearly, looking at the numbers that we're looking at, there is, of course, the very, very possible prospect that the city is going to have to move to furloughs and layoffs. You announced over the weekend that you were going to hold off on unveiling that plan until the second week in June, in the hopes that Congress comes through with an aid package similar, or at least close to, the one that was approved by House Democrats, that appears to be dead in the US Senate, and that the president has said he will not support. That plan would allow the city to stave off, I assume, at least some of those proposed cuts. Now, you know, I live in Albany. I always think of Albany as being, it's a company town, and the company is, of course, New York State government. But, you know, so many people in Albany as well. It's a big public sector town, without a doubt.
Yeah, and you know, these impacts are going to be really devastating to our economy if we have to move forward with these layoffs. We probably are going to have to announce something by the middle of next week. I'm hoping that Congress, that the Senate does act on some sort of aid package, some compromise. There's a real sense of urgency to this because we need to know now. To imagine having to cut really about $18 million from our budget halfway through the year. You know, that's really the equivalent of cutting $36 million from a $181 million budget. Devastating. The city services that will no longer be available, I think, are going to shock people. As we've looked at how we can absorb these revenue losses, it is really a significant challenge. And I'm hopeful that some sort of package will come through. You know, cities more than 500,000 did get aid, but this is impacting, you know, cities and villages and towns across the country. You know, I look at my friends in the suburbs, you know, Colony, Guilderland, we all rely pretty significantly on sales tax revenue, for example. And that's impacted. We are required to balance our budgets. And so we have to take action now if we're going to get to any semblance of a balanced budget by the end of the year, unless this revenue is replaced.
What level of information might come out next week?
Well, I mean, we're really looking at when we would need to, every week that we delay taking action, it's going to require more action because we have a shorter period of time to make up for that lost revenue. So we were hoping for some indication that there might be a compromise in place. I know that the U.S. Conference of Mayors, the Conference of County Executives, the Conference of Governors, all bipartisan, all fighting for this direct aid. This is impacting cities that are run by Democrats, Republicans, and independents. And so we really hope that over the next week, residents from across this country will make their voices heard and say, we cannot start laying off cops and firefighters at the very time that we need our police and our firefighters here in our cities. They've been on the front line from the very beginning. I think of our sanitation workers. I think of the people who've shown up to work under really difficult circumstances. And now is not the time for us to let them down.
Something that came up in a story that Brendan Lyons, our Capitol Bureau Chief, did over the weekend in regards to state workers was the prospect that the state did not go to of furloughing or laying off workers. So far, state employees have been sort of held harmless in terms of furloughs or layoffs. And noting that if the state had moved towards furloughing workers who, unlike the many who have been able to continue to provide services at home, a subset of workers have definitely been unable to be as productive or even do any of their jobs, from homes just because of the nature of their jobs. And that if the state had moved to furlough them, it would have allowed them to collect federal unemployment. That, of course, would amount to the type of federal aid that you are talking about right now. It's, of course, a roundabout way of getting that federal aid. But do you think that municipalities like the state might have missed an opportunity or should have considered that perhaps in the opening weeks of this crisis?
Well, I think, hindsight it's easy. When we started the New York pause, we thought it was going to last 2 weeks, 3 weeks. We did not anticipate that schools would not reopen. So, for example, there are those who were critical that we waited to lay off our crossing guards. But we didn't know when we might need to call them back. And so we wanted to have them at the ready. And I think, there's also the state unemployment part of this. So you're taking it out of one pot. Yes, there was that federal, enhancement, but it's also, you're also tapping into taxpayer dollars either way. And I think, to my point of we need to be here to help turn the economy back on, once you start laying off workers, furloughing workers, getting them back can be a challenge. And so we want to be ready to turn the economy back on. We want to be there. We want to have our code inspectors available. We want to have, our planning office operational so that we can look at ways to be innovative to help our small businesses. We have a great grant program that we're looking to roll out in the next couple of weeks, and we need people to be able to help facilitate that for small businesses, particularly minority-owned businesses. So, it is a challenge to say, well, you could have just laid everybody off and then expect to be able to flip a switch and turn it back on.
All of this takes place, of course, in the context of an ongoing problem for the city of Albany, which is that you have made the argument, I've seen you make it in budget presentations every year, that the city is significantly underfunded by state aid in comparison per capita to other cities, especially considering the fact that so much property within the city limits is state owned and therefore exempt from tax. You have made the case. I think the usual ask is about $10 million. And
actually, it's a 12 and a half, but
12 and a half, sorry.
Let's not quibble.
Let's not quibble about $2.5 million. And that's going to continue to be an ongoing problem that, of course, is only going to be exacerbated by the fiscal hole that the state as well as the city finds themselves in.
Well, I will say that I was really pleased and grateful to the governor, to the speaker, to the leader, to our legislative coalition that the $12 million was included in the state budget, notwithstanding the fact that we were, knew that we were going to be facing some really challenging financial headwaters. And so that money is in there. We expect that it will be reduced by whatever the amount of state aid is reduced, but we're at least not starting from zero. And so I think we've made that case. I think the state fully understands how that money is spent, why it's necessary. And that's what makes these cuts so challenging. We have already trimmed everything that we can trim. We run a very, very, very lean city government. And so in looking at the financial picture ahead of us, $18 million, you're talking about cutting essential city services and really cutting to the bone.
You decided to forego the remainder of your salary for this year. Mayor of Albany makes about $135,000 a year. You, of course, came to public service after a very successful career in the private sector. So you have, your household has resources to draw on. But why did you want to take that step?
Well, when I started to look at the cuts that we were going to have to make, for every dollar I earn, that's a dollar that somebody else could be earning. And, these are people. It's unlike some of the challenges that I had in the private sector when there were a couple of times in my career where we had to do some reductions in force. But, you knew you were saving an entire business and that you were saving hundreds, if not thousands of jobs by making the difficult decisions that you were making. In city government, it's different. This is the losses that we're going to have in services for our residents and the impact to our employees is really a function of something that is nobody's fault, right? This is a virus that spread and that caused financial havoc. And that, what we're dealing with is this revenue issue. And so, I was able to make that decision. I do believe people should get paid to work. So, I think that it's symbolic. And I sometimes worry about the symbolism because I don't want it to be interpreted as, only people who have the financial means to forego a salary can do public service. I think that that's absolutely the wrong message for public officials like myself to send. But in these circumstances, I made the determination to forego my salary.
I want to ask you as well about the question of disparities of impact across various elements of our community. I know you took part in a town hall, a virtual town hall, of course, with other experts and local officials just last week, looking at that.
And, we're really seeing the impact of the virus in the city of Albany, as we're seeing across the country, the disparate impact, particularly on people of color and people of low income. And that's because many of them are the very frontline workers that we rely on. I think of the low wages that people who are doing home health care and working in nursing homes, doing working in our hospitals that are on the front lines, our bus drivers, grocery clerks. So the exposure, the ability to keep yourself from being exposed is easier for higher income people. And all the data and everything that we're seeing is showing us that. And also access to information. One of the things we talked about in that town hall is that there is a disparity in how that information gets disseminated through the community, making sure that you're using trusted communicators. We've really relied heavily, for example, on many of the African-American ministers here in the city of Albany, really looking for those trusted communicators to get the word out, setting up testing sites in neighborhoods, in communities with trusted providers. That's why we're, so grateful that we have Whitney Young on board, so that we can do all that we can to ensure that there's access to testing and as well as access to treatment for people who do become sick.
I want to ask you as well about there have been a couple. There was one on Saturday at the Capitol, rallies by people who are opposed to the continued shut down, who want to reopen the economy very quickly, many of whom are even opposed to the idea of wearing masks. For the first significant one of these rallies, you actually did sort of a video outreach, just asking people to please stay away from the area around the Capitol while the rally was going on. These rallies present risks, not only to people who might just be bystanders or might be wandering by or might still be working at the Capitol complex, but also to the city of Albany's law enforcement as well, right?
Absolutely. And I understand people's First Amendment rights. I understand people's frustration. You only have to look at my hair to know that I desperately want for our economy to be able to reopen, but it has to be safe. And, this is about how do we keep one another safe? I think that we've worked really hard to put policies in place that allow us to get PPE where it needs to go, testing sites up where they need to go. Those are all government functions. We cannot we cannot legislate against a virus. The virus will spread. It will do what viruses do. And so we're just trying the best that we can to protect as many people as we can and to prevent loss of life and to prevent suffering. And so, I understand the frustration, but just protesting and demanding that we reopen government or reopen businesses isn't going to keep people safe. You look at the barber who continued to cut hair and didn't listen to New York Paws, didn't abide by that, and not only is he sick, but many of the people that he whose hair he cut have all tested positive for this virus, which can kill people. And so, I think that we all need to recognize that we're in this together, and protesting against it may make people feel better, but it's certainly not keeping them safe, and it's not keeping this community safe.
So on a personal note, you used to live in my beautiful Pine Hills, where I am broadcasting from right now. And actually, I think just very, very close, maybe even just a couple of houses down from our multimedia producer, Jess Marshall. And you and your husband have at considerable effort and expense rehabbed a beautiful row house in the Mansion District. But do you miss having a great big yard amid all the shutdown?
We're here actually over in Arbor Hill. And
in Arbor Hill.
we're in the Timber Triangle, but I have a beautiful dog park right across the street. And I can walk down to the river and walk along the Corning Preserve Trail. So we're really pleased. We were in the process of building a garage in the back of our property. We're on an alley, which had to be paused because of New York Paws and is now a mud pit. So that's a little bit frustrating. We'll look forward to having that back and the construction back, but we're going to create a little oasis back there. And so I do think, though, particularly for families with young kids, God love you all. We're beyond those years. You and I think your son's, I think, the same age as my son.
Yeah, just turned 20 last week. And yes,
yeah.
I've thanked my lucky stars over the course of the last 2 months that
we're not homeschooling and dealing with rambunctious kids. Yeah.
Listen, I really appreciate your taking the time, and I think I speak for a lot of people who are watching and listening, and just saying that we wish you well amid these unprecedented challenges.
Thanks, and same to you.
Great, take care.
You too.
All right, well, that was Mayor Kathy Sheehan. We very much appreciate her taking the time, and I don't think no questions popped up, so. Thank you all very much for watching as well. Tomorrow, your lunchtime Facebook Live, Twitter, and YouTube chat will be my outstanding colleague, Steve Barnes, one of the best arts writers and food writers this region has to offer. Please tune in for that as well. And as noted at the top of the show, 9 a.m. tomorrow, the fourth and final installment of the Times Union Hugh Johnson Advisors Back to Business webinars will be examining the ways in which businesses might want to, or not might, but need to reinvent themselves to meet the challenges of the economy after the coronavirus crisis. So With that in mind, I hope everybody has a good day. It is still gray outside, not nearly as nice as it was over the weekend. Please stay safe, please stay well, and support local journalism. Thanks.